Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is April 18, 2021, and it's an honor and a pleasure to do another McLuhan Mashup, though we're renaming it Musical Mashup today.
Oh, yeah?
With Simon Prentice. Where are you calling in from, Simon?
I am calling in from Acton, London, the United Kingdom, still united, although possibly not for very much longer. And yeah, it is 10 o'clock in the evening where I am.
Thank you. And we have Duncan Eccleston. Duncan, is that the correct way to pronounce your last name?
Very good, Gerry. Very good.
And you're calling in from where, Duncan?
Dripping Springs, Central Texas, United States, world, universe.
Still united.
Yeah.
I've lost Duncan, by the way. I've lost his picture. Is that a...
Oh, yeah. It will pop in and out. That's
okay.
Okay. And we've got the great Clinton Ignatoff pushing the buttons. And where are you calling in from, Clinton?
Wonderful summary, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, North America.
Well, thanks for facilitating, and I really am grateful for all of you showing up on time. And I'm calling in from Venice, California. And, we have commonality in this line that Kipling first said, "East is east, west is west. Never shall the twain meet." Yeah, well, then James Joyce said that the West shall something the East. What did he say? That the West shall, I can't even read my own handwriting.
The West shall shake the East away.
Leave it to Duncan the dancer. The West shall shake the East awake, while ye have the night for morn. So maybe we can mash up some more East and West philosophies, clashing and colliding, and maybe even what's the opposite of colliding? Like mashing,
forming a new synthesis,
intertwining,
forming a new synthesis. That's like alchemy.
Yeah.
You take two known things, put them together, and you come up with a third unknown thing. So, one question that really intrigued me in gathering you brainiacs was that Simon said, "What is the origin of language?" So we're going to be dealing with language, and boy, did I have fun exploring that question, Simon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's amazing how little it's really discussed, actually.
Oh, yeah, it's not discussed, but it's discussed, but we don't know it. It's a mystery.
Well,
so that's
the thing.
Yeah, music and mystery.
Or is it?
Yeah. Is it? Yeah, but music and mystery are similar because it was actually this morning I was listening to Jerry Garcia talk with Paul Krasner, and he said that the East Indian music composers and players believe that the interval in music have contained emotional realities. Each interval has an emotional truth. So, we could talk about what an interval is, but we have all this space between us, but we're joined as one brain, and in like one big note, all four of our voices. So this idea that we're just jamming here is beautiful because we're just making music.
Yeah,
and
but we're only doing it because we have language. That's
but we're only doing it because we have language. Good, because we could tap it out on our camera with our.
We could try, but it would be less interesting. Well, it might be fun.
we want to excite.
Too many conclusions.
We want to excite the YouTube viewer, and Duncan taught me about Balboa swing dancing the other day, which I was just intrigued in. So this is a dance and a music session. So, I mean, you guys, we'll go everywhere, but let's start off with the tetrad on the word origin.
Hang on. Before you do that, I just want to insert a little sort of observation about Kipling, since you quoted him.
Please.
Most people don't seem to know this, but the punchline of the poem, if you've been so unfortunate as to have to read it, actually, even though it's had all this stuff about east is east and west is west, the punchline, I'm going to have to read it, goes, but there is neither east nor west, border nor breed nor birth, when two strong men stand face to face, though they come from the ends of the earth. So he's basically saying, yeah, east is east and west is west, at least on a superficial level, but when you get down to it, that's not true. We're all the same. We're all playing the same game here. We're all measuring each other by the same standards. So it's much kind of misquoted in that sense.
Got you. So he's saying what we're doing now is we have a commonality, Simon, Duncan, and Clinton. We have English language. That's our commonality for the next 2 hours.
Okay, unless you want to
Among,
switch to
among
Japanese
others.
or-
Among others. So
We better stick with English.
and music.
Oh,
We could sing.
and dance and touch. So I thought it was interesting to throw a curve in this, that we're going to talk about language, origin of language, but why not discuss the word origin first? Because it come from 14th century, mean ancestry, race, rise, commencement, beginning, source, descent, and lineage. Well, lineage is funny because we've been trying to figure out the first human invention ever, and we come to the conclusion it might be the line. Just a line might be the first human invention. It might be a tool, it might be a grunt, it might be an eye gaze, it might be theater, who knows? But to say origin comes from this word line, birth, become, visible, and then 1560s, origin was designated as meaning the beginning of existence. In 1600s, really puts it in the gobbledygook Finneganese way. That from which something derives its being or nature. So just those first words, that from which, but it ends with nature. So we want to think, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's if we stick to the English word origin. But if you think what origin really means, we represent the meaning of it when we're speaking English using the noise origin, right? But the concept origin is expressed in different ways in different languages, and they all have all different nuances. So I'm not really sure whether just focusing on the actual historical accidents of how we come to say origin.
it strikes me that this is all before Descartes, because I mean, the first thing I think of when I think of origin is point of origin, or 3 zeros for X, Y, and Z. Like that's determinant in my
Okay.
instinct, and then to think of the use of the word even before that is like, oh yeah, I guess it was probably a thing before that too, right?
Well, it's sort of, we name it because we have a need to name it, because we have a concept that requires tagging, and we just make a noise that we all agree is going to be a reference to that. But how we got to tag it that way is interesting. But it's, if we're worried about what origin means, where we don't want to get lost in too much etymology, as I believe it's known in the trade.
That's exactly what set the ground. Was I gave the etymology of the word origin. Now we're going to open it up and say, I think that everything has always been. All times are happening now. Joyce and Zappa said that. Nothing ever started, nothing ever ends. It's just always being. But we invented words, so we invented the word origin. So I figured we'd start by going, let's discuss the word origin, and then go into language, because in essence we're doing that. So we'll start with you, Clinton. What does origin enhance or intensify?
Beginnings.
Yeah. Now here's the thing. That's obvious, and we know that, and that we need the obvious. We're trying to be deep sea divers and go deeper and say what actually Simon brought up a little is how does us inventing origin, the word, the symbol, shape our behavior? Not what the word, the thing origin enhances. What's the environment that it created and how's that shape our environment? So not why we invented the word origin to mean, the beginning of existence. Okay,
because you
Duncan.
gave out I'll just point out, because you gave out so many definitions, like you're throwing around all these different ideas under the umbrella origin. Like lineage doesn't feel like it has a beginning. It feels like it's a progression going back, into the fog, sort of. So
yeah. And here's Clint, that was good, because here's the thing. You each put it into the context you want. So we don't have to have the commonality and go, I meant origin this way. You can if you want. So Duncan, what does origin enhance or intensify?
Well, origin is an attempt to create a beginning. And we try to convince each other that the beginning we create is the real beginning. But it's a conceit.
Conceit. What's another word for conceit? What does that mean?
It's an invention.
An artificial concept.
Yeah. I've been reading a lot of Gregory Bateson recently, who I've loved for decades. And he says, the world is a complex place, and it can be divided in many different ways. And depending upon how we divide it up, it'll have an impact on us, particularly if we forget that we divided it up in a particular way. And as you know, I'm highly influenced by Peter Berger's book, The Social Construction of Reality. So depending upon how we agree to define origin, it entails lots of other things.
Yeah. Good.
So I'll stop.
No, that was good, Duncan. Thank you. And I love Bateson too. Amazing thinker. Okay, Simon, what does origin enhance?
Time.
Time, yes. Okay.
So because it takes us out of that whole idea that there's only now and it's all happening at once. The whole notion of origin suggests that there's some kind of linear progression. Maybe not linear, but certainly an evolution from one step to another. So it puts us on a time frame. So it enhances time.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, Clinton, what does origin render obsolete or displace? Don't worry about time here. We got the time. We're all on time. But I mean, don't think, because a car rendered the horse and buggy obsolete, horse and buggy is still around. So don't think of it as it's gone completely when I say obsolete. What does origin render obsolete or displace?
Influenced by Simon's answer, I mean, eternity was the first thing that sprung to mind.
Simon influence. That's good. No, what does origin what does origin enhance? Influence. Okay. No, see, this is the beauty of Tetrad's live. It's jam session. Like if I hit a wrong note, I'll tell you a great story. What we're doing is Herbie Hancock's playing with Miles at age 18. He hits a wrong chord. Miles looks at him and he knows he hit the wrong chord. And then Miles takes the wrong chord and just melts it into the composition. So Herbie's the young Turk and he's like, oh no, I messed up. And he stuck with him because last year he lectured at Harvard and said this was like the biggest, lesson I learned in flipping that and knowing he messed up, but how cool Miles morphed it in. I asked a great boogie woogie pianist, Hadda Brooks, I says, Thelonious Monk says there's no wrong notes. Agree or disagree? She goes, No, there's wrong notes, but it's just how good you cover them up.
Yeah.
Kalina,
It is. I mean,
Mike,
anybody who's improvising has to live with that. I mean, if you're improvising, you're gonna go make a wrong move, and if you can see a way to use it, then it wasn't. But sometimes
actually,
it is.
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
origin of a
actually,
new technique.
yeah, Mike Keneally said, Thelonious Monk says there's no wrong notes. Agree or disagree? Because, yeah, if you're Thelonious Monk, there are no wrong notes. You know, if you're that good. Okay, Duncan, what does origin render obsolete?
If you take it completely seriously, it renders the feeling of timelessness obsolete.
Wow, feeling of timelessness. When do you get the feeling of timelessness? When do you get that, Duncan?
When I realize that calling anything the origin of anything is a little bit arbitrary. It is one possibility. Like this is a biological argument here, where we have with Darwin's origin of the species, but in reality, what if you take it back and use like Lynn Margulis's thing that we are a continuation of microbial life, that's the origin. And then you can go back to the methane soup idea, which was there was all these chemicals on the planet and something happened, maybe lightning, that caused something new, where suddenly minerals and chemicals began doing something on their own. So I get the feeling, go back to the original question you asked about when do I get the feeling of timelessness? It's when I realize that all of these concepts, et cetera, we're choosing those. As long as we remember that we're choosing those. But we really exist in all times. I mean, it's the fact that we make a distinction. There's a Clinton, and there's a Simon, and there's a Gerry, and there's a Duncan. Is there? Or are we one being?
Aha.
Very good, Duncan. Simon, before we go on our tangent, origin. What does origin render obsolete or displace?
Well, I was going to say instinct for much the same reason, because if you think, I mean, this taps into the language thing more generally, but insofar as there is only now and everything else is just some imaginary stuff that's going on in our minds. I mean, there is only now. This is it. But we imagine that there might be an origin because we're thinking backwards and going because we know that certain things happened. We have memories and so forth, and we extrapolate it back. But there is only now. So an animal that doesn't have the capacity to think about all this stuff because it doesn't have language or words is here right now, and it acts on instinct. So origin, the whole notion of origin, to the extent that we're taken by that and kind of force ourselves to think in those terms, immediately cuts back on our ability to act according to instinct and just do what we think we ought to do. I mean, that's language in general, because we've got so many voices going on in our heads from the past and the present and everything else that it interferes with our ability to feel what we ought to do, which is right here, right now, I feel like doing this. But we seldom do that because we can't get rid of the junk in our heads, basically.
Yeah, roses are red, violets are blue. I'm schizophrenic, and so am I.
Excellent.
Okay, Clinton, before we do our tangent question, what Simon just said, is that what McLuhan called rear view mirrorism? Because I never get that. He says, we're walking forward looking in a rear view mirror. And I would say, well, we should be walking for. Well, I don't understand what Marshall's saying in that he's saying, well, don't look in the rear view mirror. because that's history and that doesn't matter? Or is he saying we move forward with rear view mirrorism because that's a reference and it's good? Well, how did you process that, studying that in McLuhan? Rear view mirrorism.
Well, let's say you're on a trajectory. Like if you're in a plane and you're leaving a contrail behind you, you could sort of be able to steer relative to seeing, oh, I'm doing an arc. I need to adjust the other way to go my arc in a different direction. You can get this idea of having a specific trajectory in space, and it's not really necessarily real space. When you look at the past and see where you've been and you see what it is that's changing, and you can presume will continue to change if you keep headed or keep doing what you're doing, which is like heading in the same direction that you're going in. What Simon was describing is a lot like visual space as well, because when he was talking about how instinct is dulled by having to actually think about what you're doing, which sort of arrests your impulses. It's a lot like a lot sort of like the way that you exist in space and you're aware of all the stuff that's like you're not just a body reacting to stimuli, you're a body existing in this sort of you feel like you're existing in a space which can be mapped and measured, and you might imagine sort of a top-down view of yourself in this space. Like I can think of my entire house and what I'm doing here, and then I need to run downstairs and grab the kettle before all the water boils away or something like this, right? Like your head is full of the perception of all the things even beyond what you're just sensing. And so you're sort of held in relation to everything that you are sensing is there, but you're not directly. It's like the most mundane definition of extrasensory perception you can imagine. The most mundane, boring, non-superstitious definition of I've got ESP, man. It's just like you knowing where you are and going on right beyond that. So now that particular sense can be out of date. You could be living in the rear view mirror. You could think that kids still go down to the malt shop right now and they're all sharing a chocolate shake right now, listening to the Archies or some stupid stuff like that, right? If you didn't know any better. I mean, we're always just right. You can still call your DVR a VCR, and you could still ask your kid to please tape Young and the Restless for you tonight, even though there's no tape anymore, right? Like, so
But
there's a million ways, right?
ironically, though, that I was reading this somewhere, I forget. Maybe you can tell me, because I think it certainly in the McLuhan context, I think I read it, that the idea of the rear view mirror actually is we're using it the wrong way in a sense, because what you're looking at in the rear view mirror is you're not looking to the past. You're actually looking at what's happening right now behind you as a way of looking at the future. Because why you're looking in the rear view mirror is because you want to see if some idiot is going to pull out in front of you and it's going to cause an accident. So actually, in that sense, rear view mirror is the future. It's you're looking for you're using it to project the future.
What could be
Whereas
coming up
what
from
we're
behind?
doing, what we're really doing in the sense that we normally mean when we say rear view mirror is we're actually facing backwards. And in terms of culture and the human sort of story, if you like, we are mostly looking backwards. We tend to be very conservative and look and see what's happened in the past, and use that as a reference for what we should or shouldn't do in the future. That's why we're always about 50 years behind the curve, because we're not looking forwards, we're looking backwards. That's a bit of a diversion. But
no, that's not a diversion, because that's Clinton knows this guy well too. As Wyndham Lewis said, artists live in the present,
yeah,
write a detailed history of the future. So I was trying to claim that Marshall was saying, oh, rear view mirrorism is good or bad. He's just saying this is a state, this is a condition, and this is a behavior that we should understand. So you guys sussed it out. Let's stick with Duncan's line for a second as a tangent. When do you get a feeling of timelessness? We'll go to Clinton and then Simon.
Mainly when I'm watching a movie or I'm immersed in fiction. When I'm not wherever I'm at, right? So Let's see. Last night I watched a movie, The Great and Powerful Oz, especially timeless. Sam Raimi is a great director. So it just threw me out immediately into, Oz. I was gonna say La La Land, but I think Oz is probably more appropriate, right? It's just I'm just certainly not, thinking about what I was gonna be doing today, for instance, right?
It's a perfect metaphor, Clinton, because my McLuhan teachers taught me the Wizard of Us instead of the Wizard of Oz, and that we're all atomic dogs, and we're pulling the curtain away to help reveal what's the mechanics behind it. So that the film did its job. Okay, how do you get a feeling of timelessness, Simon?
I might have to take the fifth on that one.
Is that it? You take a fifth and then you get timelessness?
Well, I don't know. It's usually more like a third or a half, but
No, that's like, did you get 2 shots? And my friend says, no, I got 3. The third one was a shot of tequila, and then the 4th is whiskey. Okay, that's beautiful.
But I think sex, drugs, and rock and roll is a fairly good sort of summary of the ways in which most humans attempt to, or maybe not even attempt to, but find themselves experiencing it. It certainly is for me.
Oh yeah, no,
or Zen. I mean, that's what Zen's all about. It's about trying to achieve the sense of being here now and just forgetting everything else. So
yeah, Sherry Turkle studied
not as much fun, however.
Yeah, not as much fun. But she studied this stuff, and she goes, "You're working hard, and you're writing, or you're working on a project, and then you look and you go, oh, a phone call, oh, an email. It takes 23 minutes for your brain to get back in that work mode. It's like 23 minutes, and I believe it. I had a major meltdown just before this started and thought I lost all this work. And then boom, I says, please God, don't let it be gone. And it was saved. And I was like, thank you.
Good.
Who saved it? Verizon, my laptop, or my prayer? Who knows? Okay, Clinton, what is origin retrieve?
A center.
Nice. Duncan.
What does origin retrieve?
Yeah, it's sort of like, what does origin bring back that we got rid of? Say, again, it's the time thing is hard to understand, to really, when you think of tetrads as poems and hieroglyphics, it is sort of that thing. We're living now and we're going with a hunch. So, if you say the car brings back or retrieves the knight in shining armor, that's cute. That's like a cute little, that it sounds so bullshit. But you know what I'm saying. So what is origin retrieve?
Well, since I wanted to respond to the rear view mirror question, I will fit that in. Origin retrieves a sense that there is a progressive reality. Okay. And the rear view mirror fits into that because we have no choice. We can reflect and imagine that we see something besides what we see in the rear view mirror. But at every moment, to give for an example, there are 4 of us now. We are assuming that this discussion will continue during the next 5 minutes. We assume that. It's based upon our experience so far this afternoon and other experiences with doing Zoom discussions and other virtual discussions. But we are completely embedded in what are potentially very fragile systems. Our reality could change drastically.
The San Andreas fault.
San Andreas fault, the Fukushima event, where suddenly people who were living in the rearview mirror suddenly were confronted with, waves 30-meter high coming at them. The 9/11 event. I mean, we're constantly subjected to all of these turbulences, which we had no way of really predicting. But we live our life as if it's going to continue pretty much the same. Okay. And that, to bring it back to the origin story, once again, I'm assuming there is a Duncan and that he's somehow independent of all these systems he's been embedded in right from the very beginning, and that he will continue in the same form. Okay. But Gerry, as you know from our Monday night discussions on the alchemy of the soul, that can change and does change for many, many people. When suddenly there's some event that happens where we discover a whole nother aspect to what we call ourself. So that's a long-winded way to answer what should have been a pretty simple question.
No, take your time. That was beautiful. Duncan, please. Assumption is almost what it retrieves. And it was amazing because Dick Cavett was interviewing a guy on his show live on TV. And he was a health food guy, and he had a heart attack and died live on the show. So they had it like, whoops, we better not air this. And then all the archivists in his staff would go, we got to go down and watch that tape again. Watch this guy die live, because any of us could have a heart attack and die right now. What would we do? I just go, you guys, well, Gerry must have fell out. Okay, Simon, that was beautiful, Duncan. Really well put. Sense of progression, that reality progresses. Progressive reality. I like progressive reality.
In the same manner that it will unfold logically from what we're experiencing. Yeah.
There's this differentiation McLuhan makes between an event and a happening. And a happening, it doesn't feel like you can explain it in terms of cause and effect. It's just sort of all sorts of stuff. It's a happening and you're in the middle of it. And it's sort of, there is no clear origin to it at all, right? Were there to be some sort of, disaster and then all sorts of, right, oh my God, there's rioting and there's this and, that place is on fire and this, and I don't even know what the hell's going on anymore, right? It's a perceptual difference, I'm sure, but the simultaneity or the complexity of, like you said, the fragile system, sort of, when a fragile interconnected system goes at multi-levels all at once, right? Because everything's interconnected, right? There's no clear progression.
Yeah, may I tell a little story?
Please.
Okay. So on September 10th, my wife and I were on the Big Island in the Hawaiian Islands, and we went to see the lava flows. There's a place near it keeps on moving, but at that particular time, let's see, there's Kona and there's the other city, Hilo. So we had gone to Hilo, and we were able to walk from a kind of little parky area out to where the lava flows were in. And on the way there, I realized I am walking on land younger than I am. And I was looking at, there were a few little lizardy type things, and there were some plants that were starting to come up. And we got to the lava flows just a little bit before sunset. And it was spectacular and mesmerizing. And I was watching, you had fiery fire and you had frigid water, and they were meeting. And I thought, this is the origin. There we go. This is the origin. This is life. These are cosmic elements meeting and having sex with each other. And they're going to create land and plants and all, and they're going to do a lot of destruction too. So that was a wonderful experience. I was totally mesmerized for about 4 hours, and finally we left and we went to where we were staying. And the next morning, in this little place that had a cabin, the woman came out. She was screaming. She said, "Turn on the television! Turn on the television!" And we thought, what in the hell is going on? We turned on the television just in time to watch a tower collapsing. And I've always felt that I'm sure there are other people in this for other reasons or in a unique position, but I was kind of abstracted from the whole thing because of my events the day before.
Nice.
So I could look at it, but I was looking at it more as part of another cosmic event.
Yeah.
In other words, I didn't take it personally.
But nonetheless, the one led to the other. The little lizardy things that leapt up on the new land that was being created and turned into life, which eventually, 4 billion years later, led to the Twin Towers coming down. So there is a sort of a connection.
There is a fullness to it all.
Yeah.
So,
No, that was beautiful. It's like the snake eating itself. In fact, there's one 9/11 film where, well, no, not a 9/11 film. There's sources, excuse me, that the Irish TV stations aired the footage and scrolled, "This is not a Hollywood movie." This is for real. The news stations wanted to show their news and know this isn't a movie. They scrolled, "This is not a Hollywood movie." But just to jump back with the event happening thing, Clinton, is when performance art started happening in the 60s. I've studied it deeply. Jack Smith and Alan Caprow are sort of called the were the inventors or the pioneers of performance art. And what it was my friend took classes from Alan Caprow, and he says, we walked up a step ladder and then we spit into a hat, and that was it. And they go, this was total bullshit. Like, performance art is just like doing, and then that's it. It's not, you don't capture it, you don't photograph it, you don't film it, you just do it. It is be here now to the ultimate, and this is our artwork. It's been around for all of existence, but that suddenly people says, well, this is a new art form. That's what art does, is fuck your shit up. You call that art? Which is McLuhan's line that Andy took from him. Warhol said, art is anything you can get away with. My friends think Trump is a great performance artist. I goes, please don't hurt
him.
Yeah, don't hurt the name of performance art with him. But here's the thing, is that eventually Marina Abramovich comes along, and she's a great performance artist, and she sells a videotape of one of her performances for 70 grand. And my friends who are performance artists goes, that's bullshit. And I goes, bullshit. It raises the bar on your art form. You might get paid now. So, it's like, well, we can change how we're going to capture that art form.
I don't know, capturing performance art, now you're an actor. Now you're
right.
I don't know. Now that's
Borat's a great example. But anyway, sorry for the divert. And that was a beautiful sort of thing that you said, Duncan, was, telling us, the story of the lava and the fire in the water, and, connecting it. So, Simon, we're on you. What does origin retrieve?
A sense of humility.
Yeah.
In the sense that, we haven't always just been as spiffnificent as we think ourselves to be. We were originally microbes, and lava and water, and it was, it came from somewhere. So we haven't always been this fantastic.
Yeah.
So a sense of humility.
Okay.
I'd like to just add in, and sort of apropos what you were saying earlier about the Wyndham Lewis, and because Frank used to say a similar thing. I think when somebody asked him about being ahead of his time, he said, I don't like to think of myself ahead of my time. I'm just in my time, and everybody else is behind the time. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about sort of rear view mirrorism, if you want to call it that. It's just that most of us are not looking at where we actually are because we're so kind of informed by and constricted by really the things that we've learned and the ways that we think it ought to be, which stops us actually seeing how it could be.
There's this dimension to living in the present that whatever it is you're doing will be constituting real things in the future, more so than just you have a memory of that event, right? Most of the events in our lives, it may be they left behind some photographs if someone took a picture, but they exist as memories, and reality sort of re-equilibrated the place after we left, and it went back to the way it was. But the people who are sitting around inventing Steve Jobs in his garage with working with Steve Wozniak, what they were doing were sort of emerged and and became something at a very low level, which swamped the entire planet. Right, what they were doing, they were living in the present.
Right.
Because what happened there was like cosmically constitutive of something that was going to erupt. And if you didn't know that they were over there doing that, right, one venture capitalist thinks, hey, this might be something, this could go places, right? Right, compared to most of the events in our lives, which are slight deviations from the norm until everything just re-equilibrates back to stasis again, right? So being at the place where you think, like this is the next best thing, right? That's what puts you in the present. And this is the idea of everything as, media, the extensions of man are our utterances and outerances, right? If you've to successfully take an idea and put it into form is to outer it, right? And that's what humans do, is things in our head can sometimes be birthed into reality, be it onto celluloid or invention or music or anything else.
But we generally need language to do it. To out it, we actually need some means of communicating. And for me, putting what's inside my head inside your head, I need to tag it with something. Which is where we get back to the origin of language, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, we're really good, Simon, because I somehow I fell out and missed the whole ahead of his time Zappa, so I'll catch up on that some other time. But what you two just said was amazing.
You were there, man.
No, I mean, all three of you went out for about a minute. I don't know. My internet might be messed up. But here's the thing.
We just wanted to give you that rear view mirror thing.
T.S. Eliot said, when I talk to you, I have to use words. And he said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue. So we know that's not true. We can talk without words, but in general, since our topic is language. So
how do you mean we can talk without words?
Well, we can do gesture, and we could do dance, and we could do
okay, we can communicate. All right, okay. Yes,
yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the verb. Yeah, but let's stay on Simon's for a second. Sense of humility. Is being humble more innate or more invented, Simon?
Ooh, well, it's invented to the extent that we couldn't really have a concept of it unless we had a sense of origin and that whole perspective on things, which is an invented perspective in the sense that Duncan's talking about it. When we're not here now, we're in an artificial world when we're looking back and comparing what we were to what we are, and whether that gives us a sense that we shouldn't be as proud of ourselves as we had thought we might have been able to. All that stuff is artificial. To that extent, it's invented. But on the other hand, the way in which we feel it, well, I don't know. It depends on the individual. Going back to your less than lamented last president, I don't believe that he had any innate sense of humility. I think that was entirely foreign to him. So to that extent, it can't be innate, because if all humans were innately humble, then he would have been too, but he clearly wasn't. So that kind of proves it.
That's true. That's good. Clinton, is humility more innate or more invented?
Who do you think you are?
Okay, Duncan, is humility more innate or more invented?
Well, I think it's innate, but it's one of the let's bring up the old expression, pride cometh before the fall. So just as in my opinion, humility is innate, so is pride. And humility, we usually experience humility when we've become too proudful and actually stumbled. Okay.
And
to
until
take,
then, we don't. Yeah.
well, I do go along with the Buddhist thing that we tend to fall into these traps. I mean, we don't, unless our parents totally oppress us and make us feel humble all the time, we're going to be prideful. We're going to, if we have any talents at all, we're going to think, my God, what a star I am.
I nailed it there. Oh my God.
Stumble. Oh shit. So, but just like in Finnegan's Wake, we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and next thing we know, we're strutting around.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That was well done, man. I feel a lot of pride and humility being with you smarty pants. Okay, Clinton. Makes me think I'm smart. Okay, Clinton, what if you take origin, press it to an extreme, what might it flip into?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Good. Duncan.
White nationalism.
Ooh.
Ossification.
Ooh.
Stagnation.
A stagnation. That's good. Okay.
Stagnation. Oh my God.
Yeah.
If you take your origin too seriously, once again, let me slip in another Gregory Batesonism.
Yeah.
He says, we have to die. If human beings didn't die, we would become stagnant. And to a certain extent, it's a pain in the ass that we have to be replaced by new little beings called toddlers and children. But, they rescue us, they rescue human life from becoming completely stagnant.
Yeah.
And it's literally expressed in old people. I mean,
present company accepted.
Arthritis is an expression of ossification.
Yeah.
And usually, not always, but it usually is accompanied by the mind becoming constricted also and getting caught in a certain origin myth.
Yeah. Even
That's
more
right.
than we always. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the beautiful Simon, what could origin become when pressed to an extreme?
A black hole.
Nice. Black hole.
That's all I got.
No, that's good. That's beautiful. So, I didn't want to dominate and stick on that too long because I thought the origin of language was a fun jumping off point. And go ahead.
Just because the black hole, in terms of origin, it makes me think of The Vanishing Point in a perspective film or a perspective painting. right? Because to go through the vanishing point, it's the name of one of McLuhan's books, is
Oh, right.
sort of this idea of breaking out of the constructs or the bounds or the perspective of being an individual and going past the horizon, right? So a black hole having an event horizon, or right, like literally sort of what in pathological terms we think of as maybe maybe having a psychotic episode or going schizophrenic or something, right? To pass through the vanishing point or go down the rabbit hole is probably a more popular phrase for it, of approaching and then going past or going to the extreme of one's origin story. I think for psychologically speaking, to think of the story of yourself, right, where you came from, and then to push that origin to an extreme and then go past the horizon, it's just a wonderful sort of way to think about the ego in that, within the space that we're defining here. So it's a great observation in that regard. And it goes entirely to language, of course, like, because it's all within language, but you tend to pick up funny resonances or get really good at freestyle rapping or something like this. There's elements of language that emerge when you get a little open-minded in that regard. That can be poetic, sort of, right? And when the meaning making goes that way is when things get interesting.
And then the other thing about origin, and certainly on a personal level, is I forget who I was reading and talking about this, but the notion of death being a scary thing that we so often have thought about at various points in our lives, probably. And I think the older you get, it becomes less of a scary thought. But this person who was talking about it was saying, well, why should I be scared of death? Why should the idea of nothingness be in any sense of a concern? Because I was nothing until I was born, and it didn't bother me then. So why is it going to bother me at the other end? I mean, that is true. Why would it? Besides, be here now. We're here now. That's it.
Yeah. It was like Max, the neuroscientist poet I interviewed the other day. I said, if God exists, what do you want God to tell you when you die? And he says, God would say, welcome home. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a sort of cool answer, because I went to this funeral for this great blues man, Charles Brown. Amazing. Everybody was there. Little Richard, Solomon Burke, Bonnie Raitt. Like, it was like this superstar. And Solomon Burke says, there'll be no crying at this homegoing. He called it a homegoing. Like a funeral's homegoing. So that was a great Bates in line. We have to die. Okay, we'll start with you, Duncan. Can you forget to die?
Can I forget that I'm going to die?
Well, you can interpret it can you forget to die? Yeah. It's like, well, however you want to reword it, that's fine.
Well, yeah, no, people forget all the time, and young people forget more than older people. I mean, one of the advantages of getting older is that you don't forget as often. and therefore you begin to savor every opportunity to live. I mean, young people, they got to express a lot of energy and all that, but I don't think young people, paradoxically, I don't think young people live as much as aware old people do. And for the reason that we end up in that spot where, to use Carlos Castaneda's thing and Don Juan's deal, we keep death on our left shoulder at all times. And I think this is the origin of the Tibetan practice of meditating in the graveyard, which is really a simple, it's to help you build up a memory of death that you can no longer avoid.
Yeah.
So young people frequently forget to die. That's why they can do some really stupid shit. that kills a certain percentage of them because
That's population.
they forget they're
See,
going to that they can die.
Yeah, that's population control. We got that under hand. Okay, Clinton, can you forget to die?
Now all I'm thinking is that how one can forget to live. Actually, I think I'm flipping it. So many, right? It's much more prevalent. I think people forgetting to live.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's good. Okay, Simon, can you forget to die?
I hope so.
Good.
I'm not. I mean, again, it's what language does to it. It's. I don't imagine that many animals spend too much time thinking about whether they're going to die or not. They're just sort of doing it and then they die. And for us too. I mean, we're not going to know that we're going to die. Well, we might know. We might think, well, I'm not feeling too good. This isn't looking too good. I'm probably going out at some point. But at the moment that it happens, you're not going to be thinking, oh, I'm going to remember to die now. It's not going to be there. I think, remembering to live is what Clinton just said. That's the thing. It's
Mhm.
if you don't remember to live that you're in trouble. Death will take care of itself.
Those who live well live long enough.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well put. You guys are all positive Pollyannas like me. You think we're here to have a good time, and we're going to have a good time. So, Simon, I love the question, what is the origin of language? And I was thinking of this question too, what makes language? So why don't we just start with you? What is the origin of language? I mean, I asked you guys, what's the three unresolved questions you have? So, I mean, you asked a question. Do you want to talk about your proposed answer or your thoughts, or are you is
very
that
happy
yeah,
to.
go ahead. Yeah.
Well, when I first started sort of thinking about it, I started looking at the literature, and as you will have discovered a little bit yourself, Gerry, that there ain't too many answers out there. And in fact, officially, according to Chomsky, it is a mystery. We can't ever know this. But what we do know is that all animals communicate, whether or not they have language. Well, they don't. I mean, technically, I'm going to define language as using words and grammar. That would be my definition of language. But so we are the only, as far as we know, we're the only species to have language. So how did that happen? What was the flip that went on? And the standard model, if you like, is the Chomsky theory, which is that something just happened one day in our brain. There was some kind of genetic mutation that happened, and suddenly we could do grammar. I mean, that literally is the standard interpretation. Now, there are a few people coming through now who question that, and rightly so. One of them is Daniel Everett, who you referenced in your material that you sent to us. But it's still we're still kind of looking for some mysterious sort of mental faculty. It's like Daniel Everett himself. He's going, oh, well, we started thinking symbolically. That's how we have language. It's like, oh, so how did we start thinking symbolically? How would you know that? I mean, well, we're wired for culture. Somebody has written a book called Wired for Culture. And you think, well, how would we actually know that? So the way I'm thinking about it right now, and the book will be out in a month. Theoretically, I'm going to be doing that. I'll talk about that later, maybe. But anyway,
You mean your book?
I mean my book. Yes, finally,
Oh,
the
good.
long rumored, 25
Good.
years in the making.
Wonderful.
Good.
The thing about language is that it's generally thought to be a parallel process of words and grammar together. It's a set, We have words and we use the words, we can put them together. Words are made up of sounds, and then that gives us a vocabulary, and then we manipulate them with grammar, and so that's how it works. But it's not a simultaneous thing. It has to have been words came first. This is my thing, and it's incredibly simple, and I cannot believe that nobody is talking about it in these terms. But I have searched high and low for at least 10 years, and I cannot find anybody talking it in these terms. A word. What are words? Words are noises that we put together. Now, you think of it like letters. You know, like there are 26 letters in the English alphabet, although there's only 21 in the Italian alphabet and different alphabets. But basically, a fixed number of noises that we put together. And that allows us, just like numbers, to make any number of words that we want, right? Now, what do animals do? Other animals just have a set of a few noises that they make, like moo or bah, or whatever it is, that they make noises that they can communicate with, but they can't make enough noises that they've got enough to talk about. And they're not putting the noises together. Now, what I think happened, if you're asking my opinion of the origin of language, is that we reached a kind of a limit with the number of noises that we could actually make that were just random different noises. And we started to put them together. We realized that if you put noises together and make combinations, maybe we didn't realize it, this just happened, then you can have as many as you like. And it's like, you think, oh, well, how could that have happened? That's like a sort of basically it's digitizing noise is what we've done. We've taken bits of noise and sliced them up and put them together in different combinations, and suddenly that gives you a whole bunch of options.
So like phonemes were words before we started having to bundle
That's what I
phonemes
think.
together.
Yeah. And one of the pieces of really interesting smoking gun evidence is that the oldest languages that we think we know about are the languages spoken by the San people in they're the click languages basically. Now they have about 140 phonemes. 140 fucking phonemes. That's a lot. English, just so you know, English has 44. Japanese has 20. Hawaiian has 13, and if you get right down into the jungles of South America, the smallest number of phonemes in a language that we've yet found is 11, right? So why has that happened? Why has one language gone off with loads of phonemes and others? Well, it's quite simple, because you don't need that many. If you with just 11 phonemes, you can make as many words as you like. So that kind of is a smoking gun, although it's not, you can't prove it without a time machine. That sort of shows that we probably went from having a lot of phonemes that just meant stuff, like oi and sort of, noise, just analog noises that meant something. And then one day we realized if we went oi or oi, that would give us two different meanings. and that's how it works. We put it together like that. We just digitize noise. And then we have a load of words, and then we have to think about grammar. Grammar comes from that. But animals haven't got there, except they have, because now we're starting to look at animals, and we see that there are lots of species that have started down that road. They've started putting noises together, and there are a few examples at the moment. Because we haven't really looked hard enough. That's the thing. We've never really tried, but now we are starting to look at the way animals communicate. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that none of them have got anywhere close to what we've done with it. But the thing is, once you get there, it's like a singularity. You've suddenly gone from just making noises to suddenly having an infinite range of noises that you can make. That's crossing a line that just suddenly goes exponentially off the scale, and that's what humans have done. And I personally think that accounts for the size of our brains, because we have a brain that's 3 times the size of a chimpanzee. Now, nobody, again, bizarrely, has an explanation for that. It's like, oh, well, somehow our brains got bigger. And then we had language. That's the standard, explanation. But how about we invented, we came up with having lots of words, and that suddenly meant that we could communicate with each other, which meant we could share our brains, which meant that the smarter folk had an advantage. Suddenly there's a huge evolutionary reason why our brains should get bigger. So I think that language is what drove the brain expansion as well. So, it's pretty critical, the digital change. And if you think, Wow, digital, really? How did that? No, it can't be, surely. The best example is look at DNA, the way DNA works. Amino acids, there are 20 amino acids that make everything that's in our body. You know, they don't even know how many proteins there are in their body. They think maybe tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of proteins. They're all made from 20 amino acids.
Mhm.
It's just like letters of the alphabet, that you can make as many words as you like, no limit, using just 26 letters, or 44 phonemes, or 20 phonemes, or 11 phonemes, or whatever. It doesn't matter what the number is. Could be 2. You could be speaking like a fax machine. You could actually do that, but you'd need words that had like 14 or 15 syllables to actually have enough words to be able to do it. So it's not practical, but in theory you could. Anyway, I think I probably said enough for the time being.
No, that was really good. We should just ask these gentlemen if they have any questions or want to suss that out. Clinton or Duncan, go ahead.
Well, I just want to respond to Simon's thing about the two. It seems we're doing that now. It's called computer language.
Yeah,
and,
totally. Yes, exactly.
And they're just taking the 1 and the 0, and the on and the off.
That's right. That's right.
And a personal thing, when my mother had a stroke and I was faced with the unsolvable problem, as it turned out, of having to communicate with her, I thought all I need is a no and a 0. That if she can recognize a no or a yes using computers in other ways, we can work out a communication system.
Right. Right.
Okay.
I mean, strip it down to the very basics, and really, you just need two states, on, off, and that then if you repeat those in enough of a sequence, you can make enough different things. I mean, obviously, in the case of your mother, where you really are down to just a very, it's either on or off, and that's about all you can deal with. But in terms of a process, what I've been talking about, the origin of language, it's about just having enough different combinations that will give you enough things to tag everything you want to talk about.
Right.
I mean, how many words do you think? Interesting to ask you guys, because you probably maybe haven't thought about it. How many words do you think that you know?
Oh, hell.
Or the average human being? Leave yourself out of it.
The
Just
average human being?
Yeah.
Several thousand,
that you would normally not necessarily use, but know.
It's appallingly small.
Well, these are the
Maybe
sort of
not.
statistics you hear about, say like news, like the number of words that are presumed in Chinese newspapers, for instance, just because it's ideogrammic, I suppose.
Now you're talking characters. I think that's slightly different
Characters,
for
right?
words.
That's
But
different. It's not the same, right?
No.
Exactly. When it comes to words, I mean, several thousand, I should hope, at least 10,000. How many words can someone know? Yeah, I'm not counting compounds or.
Oh, okay, now you're getting clever on me. There's lexemes and there's words, but let's just stay with what would be we would normally think words. Gerry, you got any idea?
Boy, Clinton gave me. I cheated between 1 and 10,000. I would say 2,000.
I'm going to go with 800.
Wow. Well, that's very interesting. 800, because there was a guy. What was his name? Ogden, Richard Ogden. Maybe he did a. He was pioneering.
Yeah, he did the little books on language learning.
Yeah, that's right. And he came up with a simplified form of English, and he said you actually only need to know 500 words to be able to communicate very well. But the problem with that is that's true. But what he was not really being upfront about was idioms, because you can have a word like sort of get and with and on, right? They all have meanings, but then you have get on with, which doesn't necessarily mean what you think what get means, and you know what on means, and then you know what with is, but to get on with somebody means something again. So yes, 500 words might be it, but it's all the combinations of them can be a bit more confusing.
I just read
Anyway,
I just read a book about basic English. Right. That was I.A. Richards and Ogden together, right?
yeah, that's the one.
Mhm. Right.
Probably that.
When I was in Japan, I used to look at those books on occasion.
But I think it's generally thought that the average person knows about 20 to 30,000 words, knows that in their what's called passive vocabulary. But
Okay.
probably
Passive vocabulary.
on a daily basis, we're only using about 2,000 words, or maybe less in some cases. So, and most of them will be actually words like a and the and on and in and stuff like that, all connective words, sort of what are called function words. But the point about that is really that seems to be whatever language you take, although the data is really not that good because how do you actually count it? We're probably looking at about 25,000 things that we need to refer to. So how do you get to 25,000 tags? Well, let's say you've got 11 phonemes, right? 3 vowels and 8 consonants. So if you think of a syllable as being a combination of a vowel and a consonant, that gives you 8 by 3, 24 possible syllables, right? With your little Clinton nodding, he knows what I'm talking about. So then if you've got 2 syllables, that gives you the possibility of 24 by 24, which is 500 something, and then 3 syllables, and you're already up to about 13,000. So just with 11 phonemes and 3 syllables, you've more or less covered what humans need to talk about. If you've got 4 syllables, which is only a word like astonishing, is that 4 or like astonishing? Yeah, there's 4 syllables. So it's really, language is actually, when it comes down to it, really simple. It's just that we've digitized noise.
Was the digitization so formalized before
No.
the phonetic alphabet? Yeah.
Before what?
The phonetic alphabet.
No. And it's still, I mean, I think it happened. I don't think it was, we didn't sit down and go, hey guys, if we actually digitize sound, we could,
No, I agree.
it wasn't like that. It was like, it was like DNA again. I mean, DNA didn't sit down and think, hey, if we digitize this process, we could have digital infinity. It just happened because that's the efficient way to do it. So language has just sort of ended up that way because it's crossed a line of efficiency, if you like. It's just gone from being analog, which is just like holistic noises, like woof. You can't break woof up. A woof is a woof. I mean, you can woof in different ways, but it's really just one thing. Whereas if you have a woof and a moo and a bar and you put them together, then you've got possibilities. Anyway, that's my theory.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite places is in Paris. It's I believe it's called the Museum of Metrics and Technology.
Oh wow! Wait a minute, is that the one where they have in the foyer? They have this sort of Batmobile that this guy. They tried to make an aircraft that flew like a bat, and it's sort of suspended in the foyer.
No, I don't. It's a very old-looking museum.
Yeah.
And the first part of it, when you go in there, it's all about measures.
Okay.
Weights and measures, and
Yeah.
the kind of history of weights and measures.
So it's like they have like the kilo or something. It's like
well, they start with some very simple ways of measuring, and then they explain how they evolve, etc. And then they go into they had a really nice section on image making, starting with early cameras, and they go through every iteration.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up now is just the reminder that language is created over immense periods of time.
Yeah.
And is built by thousands and hundreds of thousands of people eventually. And that, using the kind of the general theory of evolution, when something became useful, people adopted it.
That's it.
Right. So, if you take the wiggle of the bees, we got the bee dance thing from fish, where the bees learned how to, wiggle their fannies to let the other bees know that, hey guys, fly 100 yards in that direction and you're going to find food. You're going to find stuff to make honey with.
Mm.
And it's, there's lots of animals that have this particular type of thing going on.
Mm.
And, you can see how once the concept of making sounds, which are pretty efficient,
Mhm.
and it just starts building on each other over thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
It's very good, I think, that you think of, that you put it like language as in like the language, the totality of the language itself is sort of a collective art form, uninherited art form, because
Mm.
I guess this is the difference between language and speech. When in speech you're using some words, but those words exist in relation to the entire language, right? And so it's easy for people to think of, the sounds themselves are just arbitrary. We could have called that a tree, or we could have called it a glop, or we could have called it anything, right? Like, but I don't think that I don't think it's fair to think of the terms as meaningless or arbitrary
Mm.
when you take them out of the context of the language to which they belong, because there are words that rhyme, and so we use them together all the time, because when we're singing or we're writing a poetry or we're just trying to
Mm.
be eloquent, we're going to have the word me with the word see, or be, all emphasized because it sounds nice, right? And so
Right.
if either one of those words were not rhyming with the other two, they wouldn't occur in such, right? So the language itself, words that aren't arbitrary sounds, um, uh, at all, if you're already
Well,
speaking a language.
yes, there's a relationship within the language itself, but there is no reason. There's no. I mean, the fact that we say tree
Hmm.
as opposed to arbre in French or ki in Japanese, there's nothing that's particularly ki about a tree as opposed to arbre, or
Hmm.
it's all the different. I mean, water, for example, which is like one of the most important things that we need to stay alive. Every language has got a completely different noise that they use. I mean, there are some that are related, like German says Wasser and water are obviously very, very close, but then that's because they evolved relatively recently. But other languages have noises that are completely different. I mean, mizu in Japanese doesn't sound anything like water.
Hmm.
But it's no more or less like water than water is, or H2O. Maybe we should all call it that. But so there's and probably when it started, the first person that came up with a word for water probably had a reason for it. I mean, he must have gone or something, and it's like, oh, it felt like that to him, or her. But it very quickly, I think, it becomes a sort of something that maybe has a relation to other parts of the language, but then the language goes on and evolves and turns into something else, because when a group breaks off and goes off to Australia eventually. But I mean, each little founding group, each time a group broke up because they got pissed off with their parents or whatever the reason was, they went off and they decided, you know what, we're not going to use that stupid word that they use. We're going to call it something else. And the same with phonemes. I mean, think of English. I mean, think of the classic example, really. English has this TH sound, the and th. You know, there's only 4 languages that are currently widely used in the world that use that sound. And most languages can't say it. I mean, you think the way any language that foreign speakers, they talk like this, and they don't say th, they go d or s, and we don't have any problem understanding them. It's perfectly easy to understand them. So you just drop these complicated sounds that, like click languages. The click languages, they gradually broke away, and people went, fuck this, I'm not going to use that stupid sort of sound. Let's forget it. I mean, and again, it wouldn't have been a conscious thing. It's just sort of, it's inefficient, and it gradually just sort of disappears. Or else there's a fashion and somebody starts lisping again because somebody spoke like this. So we're all going to speak like that because the king started speaking like that, or whatever. You know?
Right.
So
Well,
it's driven by fashion and efficiency and all kinds of stuff. You know?
and the way that it feels when it's said. I mean, you
Yeah,
taught
sure.
you taught English in Japan. I also taught English in Japan, and you know, in the very first year, I was teaching my students to say the
Da?
the.
All right.
Okay, did you see the cat? English speakers, because I thought that's the way, you know, and going to. I would say people, you know, well, you say going to, and even as a native speaker, it took me a long time to realize we never say that. We
Gonna?
never say, "Are you gonna go?
Yeah.
Are you gonna go?"
Mm.
Did you see the? Did you see the? You know, there's no the
Absolutely.
unless you're being pedantic as hell. But you know, in all languages, there was a little thing on Facebook today. God, I need to look it up, but there was this big argument about, well, do you use the plural, because the actual, it's a fairly complicated sentence, and the beginning of it was a singular, but then it quickly goes into a plural, like the set. Yeah, I'll look it up, but it was great because the pedantics, the I people, wanted to make it singular,
Right.
wanted to make the verb singular. But the ear people would automatically make it a plural because there was a plural very close to the verb.
Right.
And it feels and sounds better. Okay.
Well, just go on. Sorry.
Well, I don't have much further to go. It's just that a lot of the reduction and the changes in evolution of language, in my experience, is because it's more efficient, because it feels better when we say it.
Yeah.
Okay, but then there's the official language. You know, the upper classes are always trying to get the upper hand. And one way to distinguish themselves is by having a slightly more complicated formal way of speaking.
Or bizarrely, there's a castle in England that I've been meaning to go and visit for some time, and it's spelt Belvoir castle, right? Belvoir. Now you would think that was pronounced. Well, I don't know. How would you think that was pronounced, Clinton?
Belvoir or Belvoir.
Yeah, you'd think it was something like that. It sounds like French Belvoir, as in well
Belvoir.
seen or something, right? Now, just an illustration of the upper class having the upper hand. How that is actually pronounced is Beaver Castle. Yes, of course, we live in Beaver Castle, and if you don't know that it's called Beaver, you're obviously somebody who doesn't deserve to live in a castle. It's just unbelievable. And just again, to go back onto another point about the randomness of noises, and speaking about teaching English in Japan, towards the end of my time there, I realized that because language, aside from being words, obviously we do still use noises that are just noises. And one of the kind of really fundamental noises we use when we're speaking is like filler noises, like and You know, if you're stuck for a word, you're going well, anyway, you know, like that. So and Now, it turns out that every language has got a different way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get it wrong, you just sound like a foreigner right off. Like in Japanese, Duncan, you probably know it's like eto. I am having eto. And I used to try and drill it into my students. Do not say, under any circumstances, do not say eto when you're speaking English, because I mean, even very quite fluent speakers of English who were speaking otherwise quite well, they'd say, "Oh well, today I went to see my my cousin," and you think you've just blown it by saying because you sound like an alien straight off. Whereas if you said, "I am visiting, just by saying the right noises at that point, you sound 100% more fluent than if you make the wrong noise. That's a very good indication of the arbitrariness of
That's
language.
that's really interesting. It kind of reminds me though of a French TA that I had in university French class, and she was English, but she was my TA for French class, and she would she would say donc as a filler word, which is French for so. So when she spoke English, she would go, so I was doing this, so that, and then when she was lecturing us in French, she'd go donc. Right, and I was like, what did you keep saying donk? What does that even mean? Right, and then we're like, oh, wait a minute, she's saying so. Okay, I don't think that works like that, but okay.
Yeah, the interesting part is in our newer, more globalized world is that the inability of a native speaker to accept this bleed over of a non-native speaker actually is more of a judgment on the listener than on the speaker. And at least myself, I began to realize that this is a kind of good way to very quickly determine the openness of the listener. So I used to say, people would say, well, do you speak Japanese? And I say, well, I speak what I call house Japanese, which means that family and people kindly disposed towards me will understand most of what I'm saying.
Right.
But people who have no or little international experience, or who for one reason or another don't like me, they're not going to understand me.
Yeah, definitely. And my own experience of kind of trying to because I used to find there's a sort of a barrier. Almost the better you get at speaking Japanese, the more resistance there is to the idea that you actually can do that, because the Japanese have a very sort of a strong sense that their culture is unique and that nobody can really sort of understand it unless you're Japanese. And that's true of any culture. All cultures sort of feel they've got this special secret thing. But if you're a European or a Caucasian foreigner in Japan trying to speak Japanese, they see you coming, right? It's like they expect that you're not going to be able to speak Japanese. So in order to prevent this kind of force shield coming down, that they're going to sort of just go, whoa, wait a minute, we're off the scale here. We're not, this is an alien. In order to stop that coming down, you've got to find ways of just saying something right off the bat that is so natural that you take them off guard. It's like sort of saying stuff like, hey buddy, how's it going? Something like that, something that's kind of really, that's not a particularly good example, but you've
Disarming.
got to disarm them right off the bat. It's like, oh, sorry, did I was in your way there? It's like, so that they sort of, you kind of fake them out into hearing something and seeing something that they're expecting, even though they weren't expecting it, because they look at you and you go, that can't be possible. So there's a whole sort of dark art of how to break those barriers and stop the force shields coming down.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I was married to a Japanese woman for 37 years.
Wow.
Whose English was okay, but not great. But I had, just by nature of us living together for all those years, I adopted a lot of that stuff. The kind of filler language. And what I discovered after going back to Japan, after a period of 38 years or so, was that, yes, you're right, because that comes automatically to me. Many people, not all, but many people would be more accepting of my Japanese. And even though my basic Japanese is really not that good, once again, I could have full conversations. And to take the other way around, what I learned after going back to Japan was one of the greatest things in the world. There was a little wine bar in the neighborhood. And I would always go into the wine bar and people would be all nervous about me and all that. But if I hung around for about an hour after they had a few drinks,
Yeah,
they
always
would
helps.
start approaching me and we would start speaking in English or in Japanese and all that, and everything worked fine.
Yeah, definitely.
I think this is an actually an interesting case of a global language is evolving.
Yes, I think so.
Mm.
And it's becoming easier for people to communicate in with less than what would be perfect
Yes,
King's English or
and I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I personally, people go, oh, there's only 5,000 languages left on the planet. There must have been, hundreds of thousands of them at one time, and we're losing them. All these languages are going to disappear. To my mind, that's not necessarily a problem if we all end up speaking one language. I mean, it would be nice to have other languages probably just so that you could get more of a reference on how you speak a language in general, because I think speaking another language does actually allow you to understand the whole process of language a lot better. If you only speak one language, it's just sort of automatic and you're not really very conscious of it very much. But in terms of us all being one species and actually operating as if this was one planet that we all have to kind of come to grips with as a species rather than fighting over little parts of it, having one language would be a help in the end, I think.
I actually kind of disagree with you about that, but only in a fairly mild sort of way. What I would rather have happen is I would rather there be more people with a growing tolerance towards the way people actually use language.
Mm.
So, for example, I have a great time. If I go to Japan now, and even with my poor Japanese, just the fact that at least in the cities, the Japanese people have much more experience with, quote, foreigners,
Mm.
that I can have a fantastic time talking with people. So, for example, after one of the things that happened when I went back was I had gotten into dance, social dancing.
Right.
And so the second time I went back, I had done a little searching around and I discovered some swing dance groups.
Hmm.
And I got in touch with the swing dance people.
That's not swinging, right? That's
Yeah, that's swing dance. It's
yeah.
dancing.
Okay. Just checking. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But what I discovered was what a fantastic way to get to know people
Mm.
in a very quick manner because we had a mutual interest.
Right.
And needless to say, the dancer groups had a tendency to be more open and more
Sure.
international in scope.
Sure.
But whereas when I was there in the late 70s, early 80s, it was relatively difficult to get to know people.
Yeah, absolutely.
In spite of having a Japanese wife and children who were, a mix. This time, because of dance and because so many Japanese had gone and they were interested in a wider world, that it became positively delightful. And so I see that as happening. I actually want to preserve a lot of different languages because I think they are they will lead to a more creative approach to the world and will give us a way out of our tendency to.
Yeah, but I think you're talking about culture there. And I'm not sure that language and culture are necessarily coterminous, to use the fearsome
Mhm,
academic word.
mhm.
But I think, yes, it's important that we have as much contact as possible with people who think differently and have different ways of looking at things. That's a fantastic, useful thing. But I'm not sure that necessarily having another language to do it in is adding a great deal into the equation. And I say that as someone I've gone through different ways of thinking about it. But right now, my
Mhm.
feeling
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that it doesn't make any difference whether I'm speaking English or Japanese. I don't have any difficulty in expressing what I want to say in either language, and neither of them make any difference. It's
Hmm.
you say it in a different way, but it means the same thing. I think is what I
Yeah.
want.
Okay. Well, we can have a long
We could.
conversation over many years on this topic.
The
I wanted to just ask Jeff to get Gerry in here, because I can see him sitting there, and I'm thinking, let's pull Gerry in here. But Gerry, when you started looking at the origin of language thing, because you obviously pulled some stuff off the internet there, had you previously thought about it, and if so, what had you thought about it before? I mean, as in terms of how come we speak language? How come your dog doesn't speak English or any other language? Had you thought about that?
Well, I would say I've been thinking about it my whole life, but not consciously as a subject matter until I really got into Finnegan's Wake. Because when you learn that Finnegan's Wake is language about language, then you understand, well, there's form and content. And so words are the content and language is the form. Maybe. I mean, yeah, again, it's a debatable thing and it's how you shift it around. So, no, not per se, but I found that the two TED Talks I found were really good because they were short and these guys brought up enough topics that we could talk about. Because the one that I wanted to get into, but again, we should just do part 2, 3, and 4 on this whole thing in the future, is what makes language. And the guy said, well, there's index, icon, and symbol. And then,
Yeah.
the Michael guy broke those down, and that was good. In your talk of culture and language and words is important too, because I was actually going to bring up McLuhan's line that song is just slowed down speech, and it's different because cultures are different. And so, yeah, I usually throw that question out to my music interviewees about why is there different different taste in music? Why do the Eskimos love this way to sing, and the Bulgarian women's choir loves this way? And so, I mean, I find that your question is so important because it's like when you say, what is the origin of language? That's, my main study is it innate or is it invented? Is it already there? Is consciousness already there and we're detecting it, or are we creating it? So, your line was like, well, what caused this these things to jump out of our mouths? All of a sudden, some twinkly dust, they ate some peyote. What caused these creatures to start turning their grunts and gestures into specific words? So then I'm obsessed with etymology. I love, like the word we did yesterday, it said of unknown origin. To me, that's the epitome of all words. They're all unknown origin. They come from the hoodlums in the back alleys of England, all the cool words, or the carnies, but again, it's a beautiful thing. My question would be, why are there 6,000 languages? Why were there so many? And back to your thing, well, let's have one. Well, isn't English the universal language? My friend made a documentary on global Esperanto, the guy, inventing Esperanto. Like, let's have this. So, I mean, yeah, your question, I went off on a lot of tangents, but it's basically like, it's something I'm always thinking about. And just to summarize more tangents, is The word secret came up a couple times. So when you think, and we got our commonality is Zappa. He has a song where he goes, "You can't even speak your own freaking language," and all of us, it is a great line because we can speak our own language, but we flub. And I'm a master at flubbing language because I was a idiot. I was raised in front of a TV screen. And so I never learned how to pronunciate correctly, even though I got a good education. So the Finnegan's Wake.
I got to take a short break.
Yes, no problem. Finnegan's Wake was once described to us by one of our attendees as, "Oh, I get it. This is a secret language that you have that's similar to when you're a kid and you want to talk about things in front of your parents or adults, and you have some secret code words." And so that's what the Wake is. It's like a secret language. And then you go to George Orwell. Hold on one second, Clint. George Orwell says double speak. So that is like secret language. Okay, Clint, what were you going to say?
Double speak, yeah. Okay, passing Orwell for a second, that bit about, Finnegan's Wake being a child's language, like a code language, that reminds me, actually, of a paper or a press article about some theory about the origin of language. A few years ago, I read that that thought that it would have to have been thought up by twins, like twin children growing up, because twins are just on such such the same level anyways, that it would take a twin sort of relationship of babbling back and forth to one enough for them to coherently between them build a language that could bootstrap into something that's communicable beyond that. Have you heard of that idea before? It was a few years ago.
No, to be clear, Clinton, you said you read something that said Finnegan's Wake had to be written by twins, or language had to be invented by twins.
Talking about language in general. Yeah.
Language in general.
Language, the origin of language is by twins. Yeah.
Well, that's the official Chomsky theory is that there was a genetic mutation that occurred in one individual, which allowed him or her to use grammar and speak, and you think that's just not logically possible. I mean, maybe he needed to talk to you, Clinton, about having a twin, because if you had identical twins that had it, then maybe that could have taken off. But without that, it's very hard to see how.
No, but here's if you see the hermaphrodite in Fellini's Satyricon, which I saw and knew nothing about, and then you realize that there's some humans born with both genitalia, and it's horrible how we've learned how to take care of that. You should wait 18 years and then say to the person, well, we could spend 10 years of surgery on you and you could decide to be a man or a woman. And they can go, fuck you. I'm going to stay what I am, a both. And that's what that could be, is that they hearing about this, that the first human creature could have been both. And so that whole idea of the origin of his language is thought by a twin or two, you could go to metaphors galore, the left and right. You know what Rain Man is? Rain Man is where the corpus callosum is. There's no corpus callosum.
Right.
So,
right.
We have that space. Yeah. So, but just to continue, because for a second, because I'm glad Duncan's back for a second. The amazing thing when you have language about language. So Joyce says, well, I'm going to study. I mean, this would be a great question to ask Joyce. What's the origin of language? He'd say, drinking beers in a pub and singing and telling stories by drinking beer and singing. But he goes, well, I know all this highbrow language because I got it from Aquinas or whoever, which, Marshall got all his shit from I.A. Richards, which what's the name of the book, Clinton? I.A. Richards, you just read.
Oh,
it's the new
Basic English.
Oh, basic English.
Yeah.
It's
Basic
actually
English.
yeah.
That's new criticism. New criticisms was one of the main things that enabled Marshall to be the code breaker on Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.
So there you're like you're zooming right to the epitome of it. Now here's the punchline, that if this is, like a secret language, the Wake is like a secret, and Duncan and I know this. When we're reading Finnegan's Wake, we're all like, we all get this because we think we have this secret language we can talk to each other with, because we're not just reading it out loud, we're discussing it. About 3 to 5 years ago, they translated Finnegan's Wake into Chinese and it became a bestseller. This is the epitome of the whole thing, that you can't translate Finnegan's Wake because it has 60 languages. So right there's the metaphor. There's 6,000 languages, and we're going to take 60 of them and put them in one book. It's like, how could you ever do that? Did you know 60 languages? No, he just get these words and throw them in there. He knew them enough to make it fake it. So you can't, but you can try to translate it. So we've had people come to our Wake group with an Italian version, go, oh, well, here's the Italian version. It's like, what's the point? It already has 60 languages. It is the universal language. Almost, it's like it is the Esperanto. So, all the power to them to just spread the Wakean word. But I couldn't imagine what a Finnegan's Wake reading club in China would be like, different than us reading it in fake English or whatever you want to call it.
I'll tell you a little bit about the book I was
sorry
reading.
to go on.
No, that's great. I'm because the book is about how Cloud Shannon, the cyberneticist and the guy with the theory of communication, he was trying to figure out language between the two extremes of Finnegan's Wake as the most complex random. It has the most randomness of language compared to basic English, which is the tightest. A book or all the books which were being written in basic English, which were the tightest and simplest and most predictable, like mathematically predictable, right? And so he was trying to build a model of language between these two. And anyways, this is what ended up in Jacques Lacan actually got his Freudian ideas about the symbolic use of language from this cybernetic system. Jacques Lacan is like a secret cyberneticist in that regard. So that's where his cognitive theories come from, and that's where the French get all weird. That's why no one understands them, because they don't understand that it's built on Finnegan's Wake to basic English as a model of language as a system of dynamic complexity or predictability, right?
But because we should get Andrew Crystal in there sometime, because he can explain, he sort of broke the McLuhan code really well, but he talks a little too academic, and that's his world. And it's not to criticize him. I treat him as a mentor and a grand teacher, but he can tell you how all those guys, because McLuhan went to Cambridge and got that from I.A. Richards and the Levy's, that spawned all those French guys, Foucault, and then the list goes on. But it sort of sounds bullshitty, and they're like, oh, that's too elitist. It's not to be elitist, because even to the gentleman that Duncan's reading recently is Umberto Eco. He will talk about the Wake and McLuhan, but it is all zooming back to your ideas. Simon, is the origin of language, and what makes language. So, it's the form of the content. But the growing tolerance thing, I had to add one more thing. Duncan's beautiful line about having this growing tolerance. For 40 years, I've lived in Venice, California. I have friends who call their mother dude. I go and give an academic lecture and I go, dude, and you know, like the person who books me goes, you can't use that language in a fucking college. I mean, you can, and the kids love it. But you know, if you just say dude to women and everybody, because it's just like one of those pauses. The other word I love to find out the origin is nuh-uh. I think that is the greatest word. Nuh-uh. You ever hear that word? People go, nuh-uh. I goes, where did that word come from? Look it up and try to spell it. But to clarify simply, sorry to go on and on, Claude Shannon said this thing, you, Clinton, between Finnegan's Wake to Basic English is the name of the book, or to Basic English as a general phrase?
So Basic English is just a list of like a couple hundred words. And so in the 40s, there's a bunch of authors trying to write books and stories and travel guides, confining themselves to using Basic English. So Claude Shannon went from Finnegan's Wake to all the material being written in Basic English, which is this simple, you know, Jack and Jill level, right? Or, you know,
much of it which can be illustrated with little line drawings.
The book I read was called The Freudian Robot by Lydia Liu. The
Freudian Robot.
Freudian Robot. It's a good one.
Yeah. Very suggestive title. You know, the way you gentlemen, because you're both bilingual, Simon and Duncan, and I'm not. But the way you talk about multiple languages is the way I think of specialist jargons or shop talk, between talking computers with some people, or talking cars with my dad, or talking, you know, using, you know, purloined, unqualified, you know, psychoanalytic language that you pick up when you hang around on the wrong web forums. So, right, like, but within English itself, there are so many different.
It's jargon.
It's jargon.
That's more of a vocabulary thing. It was like when I was working as an interpreter a lot, I quickly realized that for almost every job that you did, there were probably about 10 words that you needed to know that would get you through that door, so that everybody believed that you were believable. You know, it's like you needed to know what you needed to know them in both languages. So it's like, and then at that point, even if you didn't really know what the words meant, like I remember one particular example, I was interpreting for this guy. It was in like a financial conference, and in fact, he wanted to give the talk in English, which was fine, saved me a real pain, because I don't like that word very much. Anyway, he turned to me at one point and said, how do you say futures? He was in Japanese. He said to me, "Sakimono te nanten deshita?" It's like, how do you use this word? What's this word, sakimono? And I knew that the word was futures. I knew that's how you say it in English. I don't know, and I didn't then. I still don't really understand what futures are, but I actually knew what the two words were. So he goes, "Oh my God, you're a genius! That's incredible!" Yeah, and they all thought I was amazing because I'd learned just the words. I learned the jargon, so I knew how to put these words out there. So they all think, "Oh, you speak our language! Hey, fantastic!" You know, and it's just a trick, really.
Right.
So it's not quite the same thing as speaking. Just to your point, Clinton, it's not. I think it's, you know, that you're talking about using different vocabularies and inhabiting different words, but it's still the same language. It's quite a different thing to speaking a different language, which is actually a different way of weaving it all together completely.
See, that's very. Thanks for that, because that makes me think about how many people who work and talk about computers who have that exact relation to the subject matter, where they're faking it to a large degree, and they get away with it all the time, right? Until
not just computers, trust me, it's a lot of people. Jesus, government.
It's the big.
This is actually going right back to a thing that Gerry talked about earlier, about how much language is created by the underground, the underworld. And of course, their whole purpose is they only want to be understood amongst themselves. That's the whole purpose. That's why teenagers continually reinvent language. And you know, what used to be cool suddenly has a totally different meaning and there's a totally different word, because teenagers are always trying to, they're interested in the adult world, but they're also trying to isolate themselves from the adult world
And that's
because
why we
they
have
know
6,000 languages in the world.
Mm.
that's
That's
right.
why we
Yeah.
have 6,000.
And will be part of my argument about why we will always have at least hundreds of languages in the world.
We probably
Yeah.
will.
And one of the things I was always trying to get across, particularly to those people learning a foreign language that are concerned with speaking it perfectly and communicating perfectly. And I'm always trying to say, native speakers do not communicate perfectly with each other. There's continual misunderstandings. And the more you become comfortable with that, the more you'll communicate fairly well in your new language, because people won't be freaking out about you freaking out.
And
Mhm.
especially if you get all those noises right, they'll freak out even less. The more, I mean, you can more or less get by with 2 minutes by going, I don't know, well, maybe I'm just having trouble. Can't think of that. It's like you can really spin that one out quite a lot and get by.
Mhm.
But if you're making weird noises, then you're out. You're just out.
Unless you
Yeah,
unless you happen to be with global people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Yeah.
And in which case they go, oh yeah, well, he throws in all these, little pause markers, begging time markers,
Phatic communication.
phatic communication.
That's really good. That's my younger teenage friends go sick, and I goes, wait, sick, good or bad? And then if they go bad, it's like, well, bad means good. So it's like a constant,
that's really interesting, because that also works in other languages, because the Japanese went through a phase of saying "saite," which means really, really awful, but meaning really good. It was like it was exactly like
yeah,
sick and meaning good, or that's so bad, man, meaning that's amazing. So it's that's a human thing. That's
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think that to me, an important point is to realize that not only is language to communicate, it is also to miscommunicate
yeah,
or obscure communication.
yeah.
And
Like,
that is not going to go away.
That's
yeah, you have to come around and have a drink with us sometime, meaning don't even think about it, that kind of thing.
You have to come around and have a drink with us sometime, but I'm certainly not going to tell you where we are and what time to come.
because whoever you guys said it's all a trick, and that's the most watched TED Talk ever is "Fake it to make it." And then you take the word fake, which Eric McLuhan taught us. In fact, both come from etymological Latin word "to make."
Yeah.
To
Faccio.
make, so fake or fact. And then you go to the poets. Auden says the mystery of art is we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. So we don't know if any of our inventions like numb us out or activate us and make us do things. We just embrace them. And I thought that was the slang thing was really good, because this is why McLuhan was great at gathering people to talk. At the end, he would go, so any new slang words? So he would actually ask people to come tell us the new slang words, because he wanted to stay up on them. But go ahead, Duncan.
Well, I just want to bring up the fact that, Gerry and I are involved with a group out of Sweeney's Pharmacy in Dublin, and we're reading Dante. And actually, because we're reading Dante, I've been doing a little bit of background studying, and that's how I've become more interested in Umberto Eco and some other things, and began to realize that Dante was trying to create a language, the language called Italian. This was actually and he was going into the origin of the language. This was a huge debate which raged for hundreds of years and was particularly a hot issue during Dante's time. And they were trying to figure out, well, was the original language, were they speaking Hebrew in the Garden of Eden? What were they speaking in the Garden of Eden? What was the first word that passed between Adam and God, you know? And this was a serious debate. This is like, so this has been going on for a long, long time. And that's also part of, I don't think Joyce's agenda is to create a universal language.
No.
But Joyce's agenda is to create an opportunity to investigate the nature of language, both its benefits and its defects. And that's
stretch it as far as you possibly can too. I mean, almost to the
and
point
expose it as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I just want to get that in. I think the whole thing about that argument that went on in Europe and still goes on to a certain extent. To a certain extent, that's what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
The origin of language. What was the original language?
Yeah.
Well, they've tried that a number of times over the years. I've sort of tried to track it down a bit in my research, but there've been at least 4 or 5 attempts by powerful people to isolate children and see what would happen if they weren't surrounded by language, and what you know, these are all very historical, as in not in the last few hundred years, but they definitely tried, and it doesn't work. You know, you have to be surrounded with something, otherwise you're not going to speak anything at all, basically.
Poor feral
Right.
children. Jeez.
I know.
Oh.
Yeah. Which is actually one of my more pat answers to the question of what is the origin of language. The origin of language is the need of infants to communicate with the giants they live with.
But then that's the same for all animals, though, isn't it? You know, they're all trying to do that. It's just that we've invented this super efficient way of doing it that is.
Well, we have a much more complicated language world going on.
See, I'm thinking of babies.
It didn't start like that. It started from something else. It must have started from, you know, the basic noises that other animals make. It must have started from that.
But it starts again with each individual infant, though, right? It starts afresh.
It's kind of
yeah. Well, I mean, they all want to do it, but they see the giants around them doing it, and they just read the patterns, and eventually, after a couple of years, 3 years, they got it down. You know.
Right, so they're paying very strong
pattern
attention.
Recognition. That's all it is.
Right.
Pre-existing patterns are there, which are passed on down the culture. Then we just read it each time as we're born. Boom. Oh, I seem to be in an English world. I'll learn English, or Chinese, or whatever it is.
But it's interesting how you brought up the word, the image word in the gaze. So in our studies of trying to figure out what the first human invention was, one friend insists it's eye gaze, that we invented the eye gaze because you look at your mother's eyes because you know she's going to provide you milk or some sort of unconditional love or something. Now, is that innate or invented, whatever? But then the eye gaze thing has gone huge recently because of the discussions of female gaze, and that the male gaze has dominated art and film and photography. So even females are adapting the way males. And then you find out that this woman invented cinema 130 years ago, Alice de Blanche, and was she brainwashed by the male gaze of the painters and the photographers, or was she I'm doing the female gaze? And then the one word I saw the other day that is named it all was stargazers. So then all of a sudden humans are just staring at the stars. So the whole thing of I is, you know, what's the dominant sense? they say, well, the eye is, but the ear is dominant. So that's again going back to Finnegan's Wake. He made a eye experience. You look at black and white images on paper, and he turned it into an ear experience. So you have to see the text and hear the text pronounced or mispronounced at the same time. Yeah, that's the key. You can't do it any other way. You can, but you're not going to really get it. So then it's called sense ratio shifting. So what is language? Well, no, is that an ear event or is it a eye event? Or like I always say, it's when you go into a used bookstore, it's a nose event. Book smell. I know I'm in heaven when I'm in a used bookstore because that's the smell of the books, and it's not the dominant, they're all the senses. So it's a sensual experience, this language. So I mean, it was an amazing question. I hope all three of us can meet again soon, especially as your book comes closer to publication, Simon. Tell us the name of the book.
It's called Speech, with an exclamation mark, How Language Made Us Human. So it has as the double meaning of speech, as in speech, because we did learn to speak, and speech as in I'm going to tell you now. Speech.
Oh,
How
dude.
language made us human.
Dude, that is so Wakean because Finnegan's Wake, because Zappa affected Joyce before he knew it. He said the crux of the biscuit is the apostrophe. So he got rid of the apostrophe and he said, all you Finnegans, wake up. Finnegans, wake. So he took the song title and got rid of the apostrophe, and could be interpreted as a proclamation. All you people, wake up and try to figure out how language is shaping your behavior.
Absolutely.
So if you guys want to go on and on, you can, but I'm wiped out.
I've got to put the party here.
But anybody want to make any closing remarks before I have my final benediction? Please feel free.
Well, thank you all very much. This is good, and will be continued on some level at some time. So, good luck with your book. Is the book scheduled to be published at a particular time? Is it done?
I'm scheduling it to be published by May the 21st, because I belong to a book club, and which I've been part of for 15 years or maybe more even. And at our next meeting, which will be the first time that we've been able to physically meet together in the same space for about 18 months, maybe. I don't know how long it's been. The next event will be my hosting, not the one that's coming up, but the one after that. So I will get the opportunity to say what the next book that we're going to read is, and it's going to be my book.
Yay!
I say, guys, after 15 years, instead of reading somebody else's book, you're going to read my book.
Awesome.
So
we really.
And I'm working on with Tyler. Gerry, I don't. You other guys, do you know Tyler? I don't know, but anyway, we're working on a little 9-minute video called "So Why Can't Your Dog Speak Anyway?" So why can't your dog talk anyway? That's the name of the video. So it'll be a little sort of run into it.
Great.
Yeah, you got to use that. Got to use that YouTube as promo.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Well, let me thank Clinton.
Yeah.
Let me end by giving thanks. I mean, this is all made possible because of Clinton.
Wonderful to have you,
And Gerry has been our outstanding master of ceremonies, who always has a good combination of stimulus, and then he sits back and listens, and then he steps in again. He's very good at that. And Gerry is a master at complimenting us all.
And now the closing benediction.
You all deserve it. The big question I have is, in these mashups, again, thank you, Clinton, for hosting or, facilitating and talking to. Are we trying to get useful results? And I find often I get so much stimulation from these. So yes, or are we just playing? Yes. Or are they useless? Yes. Or are they sound and practical? Yes. Or are they just speculations? Yes. And what are they dependent on? Our books, our direct experience, our nonverbal eye contact, and it's all fantasy. So the beautiful of Zoom is, we live in this virtual world, and I got it all mixed up when they said virtue signaling, and I called it virtual signaling. We're virtually signaling each other. So it's only right we end with the great Marshall line: communication of the new is a miracle, but it's not impossible. And we proved that. This is new for me. Thank you guys so